happy to be welcoming you to today's session, Webinar 6, which is on visualizing change, how interactive platforms bring climate planning to life. We know that high-quality data and well-designed adaptation strategies can only get you so far, and to actively capture and keep the attention of community members and decision makers, excellent communication tools are needed. Hazen and Sawyer and KLA are leaders in taking data and information and making highly effective platforms for inspiring interest and engagement from community members and decision makers. During today's session, we're going to hear more about Hazen's novel approach to floodwater visualization with Boston Water and Sewer Commission, and KLA's award-winning approach to bringing the planning process to life through its dashboard and other interactive tools with the City of San Antonio. After our case studies, we'll be chatting with Carla Evanbach, APA's Sustainable Community Division Secretary and Treasurer, and she'll be providing remarks on what all communities can learn from these two cutting-edge case studies and how APA, ASAP, and all of our members who are out here working on climate adaptation and resilience can team up to support more climate-ready and sustainable communities. Just a tech check before we get started today. We should have microphones off. We are in Zoom webinar mode, so that question should have been taken care of for you. You're welcome to have your cameras off or on. Please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A box to pass questions along as they come up during the course of our session. And make sure to go ahead and use that chat box to send ideas, suggestions, questions, and feel free to always pass notes and insights directly to one another, to our panelists, as our session goes along. I also want to note that Brianna Nels is here. She's our program coordinator from the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. She can take care of all of your tech needs over the course of the day today. So feel free to tap her if you're running into any tech challenges. Before we launch into the content, I just want to welcome everybody to the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. I'm Beth Gibbons. I'm the Executive Director here at ASAP. And at ASAP, our mission is to connect and support climate change adaptation professionals to advance innovation and excellence in the field of practice. We believe that climate change is a real and a serious danger to all sectors and systems, and that adaptation and resilience build stronger, more prepared communities. And when this work is done well, it leads to equitable and just outcomes for all people across those communities. At ASAP, we employ a network strategy. And what that means is that we highlight values like reciprocity, open access, something for everyone. We are a member-led and member-driven organization, and we are an organization that is built most importantly on trust. We're building trust to support collaboration so that we can make more and better change happen together more quickly across North America. That trust is critically important because our network spans across the US. We also include members throughout Canada and the Caribbean. And it is really in the strength of the diversity of our network that we are able to accelerate and bring the adaptation and resilience field forward. Our sectors cover academia, the private sector, the government, and nonprofits, and we are rapidly seeing growth across our individual members as well as the organizations who are coming to ASAP to support not just their staff, but also their clients and their collaborations to be more effective at bringing adaptation work along. Within ASAP, we have 3 core program areas. Our ASAP Connects program. This is where we bring our members together on critical topics, including professional education, climate migration, public policy, justice and equity. Our Adaptation Voices program, we share member accomplishments, we lift up member voices, we seek out where there is leadership and excellence across the adaptation field, but we also seek other fields, including environmental justice, and reach out to our aligned professions, engineering, architecture, planning, health, and ensure that we're telling the stories of adaptation and resilience from the ground up. In our Adaptation Careers program, it's through here that we assist members to excel in their current jobs through mentorship and peer learning, and explore new opportunities through our job board and through our training programs. As an ASAP member, we invite you to join us for our ASAP network meeting coming up on September 13th to 15th. If you're not yet a member, this is a terrific time to join because the network meeting is an introduction to all things ASAP, both the values and the tools of the trade, as well as an opportunity to meet and network with your fellow members. And in October, we have our ASAP Private Sector Climate Service Providers Academy, which is an opportunity for service providers to get firsthand access and working time with public data providers and also learn more about the ASAP principles of practice. In this year's Service Academy is going to be focusing on the Great Lakes, the Carolinas, and the Intermountain West, with appropriate data partners for each of those regions. Of course, none of this work would be possible without the support of our members, both individual and organizational. Really, we think about organizations which join ASAP as extending the benefits of ASAP membership to their staff, clients, and colleagues, and they ensure that they have a hand in both building the adaptation field and benefiting from the resources and knowledge that come from ASAP. We're happy today to have our two lead case study speakers, KLA and Hazen and Sawyer, both organizational members in ASAP, and we appreciate their support and we appreciate the opportunity to help tell the story of the work that they're doing. We also have year-long support for this series by the Resilient Infrastructure for Sustainable Communities cluster, which is a cluster of public and private sector professionals focused on climate resiliency via delivery and finance of market-based solutions across the Great Lakes region. And in fact, just last week, RISC announced the Buffalo Sewer Authority closed on a $54 million environmental impact bond, which the RISC cluster helped to arrange. This series is also sponsored by WSP, which is a leader in climate adaptation and resilience in the sustainability field. And they were named the most sustainable company in the engineering industry in 2019 and 2020. So before we dive right into this session, just to give you a flavor of what you can expect from this co-creation series, all of our sessions are seeking to bring forward innovative and effective adaptation practices. They'll highlight diverse project teams and talk about how justice and equity are woven throughout this work. And that includes any of the topics that we cover in these webinars. We've discussed how to reduce flooding through updated design codes and standards. We've talked about innovation and adaptation finance. We've put a focus on the way in which we practice racial and environmental justice through partnerships and the prioritization of racial equity in climate and sustainability work. And we've looked at the corporate adaptation and the TCFD journey that corporations are on. And our last session took a deep dive into the state of North Carolina, where we talked about how we can bridge the partisan divide with climate resilient solutions. You can find all of these sessions on our website at adaptationprofessionals.org or on our YouTube channel. So I'm thrilled now to move us into our session for today. Our sixth co-creation session is on visualizing change. So glad to have Hazen and Sawyer and Kim Lundgren Associates, as they are each leaders in climate and sustainability. They bring really innovative approaches to their work, and their firms are driven to deliver excellence and creative solutions for their clients. Our first speakers are going to be from the Hazen and Sawyer and Boston Water and Sewer Commission case study team, and I'm going to ask for, I'll stop sharing my slides while they work on getting their slides up. And as they do that, I will share their bios so you can know more about these excellent speakers you're about to hear from. So you'll hear first from Ben Agrawal. He is a principal engineer with Hazen and Sawyer and a registered professional engineer in the state of New Hampshire. Mr. Agrawal's area of expertise include hydrologic and hydraulic modeling, long-term planning, coastal resiliency, and sewer and drainage system evaluations. And you'll also be hearing from Charlie Jewell, Boston. He currently holds the position of Director of Planning and Sustainability at the Boston Water and Sewer Commission. He has over 31 years of experience directing and supporting public projects, and the Planning Department coordinates projects related to the Commission's CSO and Stormwater NPDES permits, discharge permit, and the MWRA, and helps coordinate work for the Commission's consent decree with the EPA. The Planning Department also completed an inundation model to show the effects of significant storms in the city of Boston, which we'll be hearing more about. Later today, we'll be joined by Chuck Wilson, who is a senior associate with Hazen and Sawyer, and will be joining us for our panel discussion. But for now, I think I'm handing it over for Ben to run your slides and Charlie to take us away to Boston.
Yeah, actually, this is Charlie Jewell. I'm going to start off with. Ben's going to run the slides, but I'm going to give you a quick overview. What I want to start with is kind of giving you a background on the city of Boston, so and how we got to where we are with this inundation model that you're going to see. Some quick statistics on the city of Boston, on the Boston Water and Sewer Commission. We are responsible for the water, sewer, and storm drain system for the city of Boston. We're separate from the city of Boston, and that becomes important later. We maintain the system. We're separate from them. We don't own any land. We don't. That's what we're responsible for. Next slide, Ben. So when we started looking at climate change, one of the first things we did is we started looking along the coast where the tide was. And what we wanted to do is we knew sea level rise is rising and we have the impact of storm surge. Now, what we wanted to do is we already have a bunch of tide gates in there and a bunch of outfalls, which you saw on the opening slide. Now, as the sea level's rising, we have portions of the city that the land is already up, but it dips back down again. And what we wanted to do was to look at areas where, as the sea level's coming up, were there areas that we could be prone to inland inundation by our system bypassing either the land that was along the coast, or if the city of Boston were to put in a barrier, the pipes would act as a bypass around that system. Next slide, Ben. This is kind of a depiction of what I'm talking about. Is we could be putting in barriers. We could have land that naturally does it, and if a storm drain system does not have a tide gate in place and the sea level comes up, it could bypass and flood inland areas. Next slide. So during our analysis, we did find some areas that needed to have some tide gates put in now. So we are starting to put those in now. But the other thing that's interesting is we have some areas where even if we put in tide gates, the water would go over the land and bypass a tide gate. So we're working with the city of Boston via Climate Ready Boston. They're sitting there looking at areas where we may need to put in barriers to hold the sea level rise and storm surge out. And then we will work in conjunction with them. Where do we need to put in tide gates to make sure that the pipes don't act as a bypass? Next slide. Now, what's interesting is the commission has a bunch of tide gates, but so do a lot of other communities, a lot of other agencies. And we also need to work with them to make sure, yes, we can protect our system, but they also need to investigate their system to see if they need tide gates and stuff. Next system. So a quick overview. So we talked about barriers along the coast, keeping sea level rise in, storm surge out, and making sure our pipes don't act as a problem. Now, we drain to the ocean, we drain to rivers, we drain to the harbor, we drain to all that stuff. Now, what's going to happen is if we have rain events, if we have sea level rise and storm surge, we're going to have more difficulty discharging stormwater. So the other thing that we're looking at is where could we strategically store stormwater in the city of Boston during events, hold it up in the system, take the pressure off of it, and then as the tide goes out, as the storm goes out, let the water go and then drain away that way. Now we're working on this one, and that's the project that's underway. Next slide. But So in 2015, the commission completed a master plan for its sewer and drain system. And in that, we looked at the effect of climate change, and we looked at sea level rise and storm surge. And we developed a model. It was a static model. It was a bathtub type model. You take the water, you pour it on the city, and you see where the inundation was. And we were seeing inundation in areas where we really didn't expect it. And so what we kind of thought was, it's a very conservative model. It's a bathtub model. The water is just poured on and you see where it goes. Next slide. So the other thing that happened, which kind of spurred this all along, is Hurricane Harvey hit Houston, and it was a major, major event. And it caused a lot of flooding and damage and stuff. So Mayor Walsh, when he was mayor at the time here, asked a question. What would happen if a major event like that were to hit Boston? His key questions he wanted answered were, where would we see flooding? For how long would we see flooding? How deep would it be? Where would we need to get people from? Where could we take people to? How many cots do we need? What critical facilities would be impacted? There were a lot of questions. They kind of lay out here, but the gist was, what happens with the city of Boston and how do we get it ready? So then what we did is we knew we needed to update our model. So we hired Hazen and Sawyer, and I'm going to let them more talk about what the process was to develop this model and a tool, because the other thing we wanted to do was to develop a tool that we could use to educate both public officials and the public. What could they expect to see out there, and how can we convey this information effectively? So I'm going to turn it over to Ben and have him start laying out the project, what we did.
Thanks, Charlie. So, I think Charlie started to point out some of the differences between this study and some of the work that was done previously. But what was unique about this modeling effort in particular is that it not only looked at coastal flooding, so we didn't only look at sea level rise and storm surge, but we also looked at the impact of rainfall in conjunction with coastal flooding. And so this model was a fully dynamic model that put both of those factors together, which is a little bit different than the bathtub type evaluation Charlie talked about before. So, one of the things that we wanted to do, and that was also unique about this particular project, is to simulate actual storms as they occur in Boston, as opposed to sort of the normal off-the-shelf design storms, if you will. And so what we did is we looked back, in the period of record, approximately 60 plus years of rainfall data in Boston, and developed 4 different types of storms and paired them up with coastal boundary conditions. And what's unique about them is each type of storm has a different distribution and intensity of rainfall. So a thunderstorm, like this particular type of storm, has a high peak intensity, a lot of rain in the beginning, sort of trails off, versus other types of storms where that high intensity, intense rainfall occurs more in the middle of the storm or the end of the storm and then trails off. And what we're trying to do, where we're looking at how does rain impact the commission's drainage system, it's important when that peak occurs, so then you understand, are the pipes already filled when you have the most intense rainfall? Do they have more capacity? And that sort of thing. And so the other important thing I'll point out on these slides is with the sea level rise and storm surge. One of the things the commission really wanted to make sure and told us they wanted to do is be consistent with what other agencies are doing. And so Mass DOT had been working with Woods Hole Group to do a hydrodynamic coastal model where they looked at sea level rise and storm surge. And so we were able to incorporate that data into our model as well. So, looking at this slide here, you can see that's the city of Boston. And what we did is split up the 2D portion of the model, which I guess, let me back up for 1 second. What's important about this model is it's 2D, meaning we not only predict flow within the pipes of the sewer and drain network, but also how does water move over the surface. And so we broke up that 2D component of the model into these 7 pieces, which I'll talk more about in a minute. And you can see all those areas in red are where coastal flooding could occur and enter into the model. And so just to show you a little bit underneath, the red lines there are all the sewer pipes that were modeled, and the blue ones are all the drain pipes that were modeled. And then these gray polygons, that shows the 2D portions of the model. So, this really combined the underground infrastructure that most people may not think about and allows us to understand how does that work together with the coastal flooding and with rainfall. So the reason we had to split it up into 7 pieces like that is because these 2D models, these 2D components of the models are really time consuming to run. And we are really pushing the limitation of the modeling software, even trying to run these particular zones right here. And just to give you some context, if we were simulating a 48-hour storm, that could take 5 days or more. And so, we ran 30 different types of storms for all 7 pieces. So you can imagine that could turn into a really huge amount of time. And so what we ended up doing is using virtual machines to run these things in parallel and save quite a bit of time. Now, this kind of gets into the second part of what Charlie was talking about, which is communicating these results. And, as you can imagine, opening up these models and running them and working with them is complex. The data is not accessible by most people, even technical people. So the commission told us we really, want to have tools and ways to make sure this stuff is accessible. So again, as Charlie was saying, one of the things that the commission wanted to look at is where are critical facilities impacted? So just giving some background, within each of those model portions, we looked at different types of critical facilities, fire stations, emergency centers, hospitals, that sort of thing. And we built 2 different types of tools to make sure this information was accessible. The first one is a Power BI dashboard, which we're not going to focus on today, but that's more of an internal tool that is useful specifically by the commission. And what that does is it allows the commission to look through the list of modeled storms, more than 30 different storms, and see quantitatively within each of these types, within each of these zones, what stations, what fire stations are flooded, for how long, how much water is there, and that sort of thing. So that's really kind of a quantitative emergency planning tool. And then the second thing, which is in red, and I'll show here in 1 second, is a tool for public communication. So like Charlie said, one of the major goals was making sure that this information was understandable and accessible by people outside of the commission and without a technical background. So what I'm going to do now is show that particular tool. So what you're looking at here is what we call the Inundation Model Viewer, and it's built on top of a Esri ArcGIS platform. And so there are 2 components to it. This first part of the website, you can see right here, BWSC gives some information on the project, some of the background we just went through, and what were the goals of the project and that sort of thing. Gives information, in a nice, accessible, easy to understand way for non-technical people. And so, anyone can go to this website, read through this information, find out what parts of the cities were looked at, what types of critical facilities were looked at, some, FAQs and that kind of thing. And then what's really interesting is when you get down to the bottom of this page, we developed this platform with the commission to make sure that non-technical people could actually look at and interact with the flood model results. And so I have this tool open in another tab right here. And essentially, I'll just start from the beginning. What this allows you to do is it allows anybody with a computer and a connection to look at the actual flood model results in real time. And so you can pick, what type of storm you want to look at, how much sea level rise and storm surge are you interested in. And when you make those selections, the map automatically updates and shows you the actual flood model results in real time. So, you can see areas with green, less than a foot of flooding, yellow, between 1 and 2 feet, and then red, more than 2 feet of flooding. And so there are a couple things I'll point out on this interface here. The first is this was supposed to be a tool for emergency planning and to communicate to people, okay, this storm is coming. Here's what types of facilities are going to be impacted. And so for each storm, what this website allows you to do is turn on critical facilities and actually see which ones are impacted. So, if we want to focus specifically, let's say, on fire stations, you can do that and zoom in and actually see, those points update on a map. And for more technical types of people, when you look at this map, when you zoom in even more, what it shows you is actually the actual number, how much water was predicted at this location. So, it's accessible and not overwhelming for non-technical people, but for people who really want to understand the details, you can zoom in and see that information. Now, when we got to this point, we talked with the commission, we talked with Charlie and John, and John and Charlie made the point that, sometimes these colors on a map don't necessarily mean a lot to people, and can we actually show them what does this flooding look like? And Charlie and John specifically threw out, hey, people understand Google Street View. When they look at that, they know, you can see a street, they know what it is. And so what we did is came up with a way to actually show, okay, these colors on a map, that's great, but what does it actually look like? And so that's what these points here on a map, on this map are. And so for each of these storms, we have a bunch of these points throughout the city at recognizable places. And what it is it's just like Google Street View. So we've actually rendered we went out, took a series of pictures at these locations and rendered the actual model predicted depth of flooding. So now, when you look at this, you can see, wow, okay, I get it. That's what this flooding looks like. And that's more accessible to people than, seeing, okay, what 2.28 feet, what does that mean? Is that a lot? Is it not a lot? And when you look at this, people can really see, okay, yeah, wow, this is a significant amount of flooding that we're dealing with here. So you can use this interface to go through and look at these different types of storms. But, another interesting thing is people are interested in, and we wanted to understand, how does sea level rise impact these types of storms? So as time goes on, is this situation going to get worse? And so what you can do in this interface is compare the year 2030 and 2070. So for each storm, we modeled the same storm, same amount of storm surge, same amount of rainfall, but with a different amount of sea level rise. And so now in this particular example, you can see, this storm that occurs in 2030 versus 2070, how much more significant the flooding is in 2070. We think, this type of representation really makes it clear to people the difference between, the effect that sea level rise can have. So, we think that this tool is really just an intuitive way that allows people to understand this somewhat complex flood model results. So I'll flip back to the presentation and just wrap it up here. So where this has left us is, the flood model, the inundation model viewers out there, anyone can go to it right now, look at these model predictions, understand the flooding from these different types of storms. And right now we're working with the commission to take the next steps, which is actually, as Charlie was indicating, looking at those outfalls, understanding where there's a potential need for a project to facilitate water being discharged, and coordinating with Climate Ready Boston. And where this is all coming together is, and again, in an updated version of what I just showed, that is going to combine model predictions of, the no action scenario, if you will. So sort of, what would happen if nothing is done. And then we'll build on top of that an adaptation scenario. So for all those same storms, you'll be able to see, okay, if certain projects are built, how is that flooding reduced and what does it look like? that, Charlie, unless you have anything to add.
Any questions? How do you want to handle this?
I think we have a couple minutes right now, so I think that we should take some questions that are really pertaining to the model design and development. And then as other people might reflect on questions they have about the whole process, we can come back to those. I mean, such a cool product. I think that visualization is amazing to be able to be on the street and see that print of what kind of storm is this as you experience the Google Street View is really, really neat. So one question that came in, I think you've answered this, but I want to make sure our participant heard the response. They had asked if these were, are you using Atlas 14 curves, or are you exceeding those based on some of the newer research?
I'm going to let Ben talk about how we did the rain event. It was very interesting what Hazen did on this. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's a great question. And we actually did start with Atlas 14. And so, with each of these different types of storm events, we looked in the historical period of record and said, okay, what's the biggest one? Where's the biggest nor'easter that occurred? And then went back to Atlas 14 and said, okay, here's the biggest one. For what we're going to model, we're going to round up to the next return interval to account for more intense storms in the future.
Cool. Then
I'm sorry. One thing I want to build on that, because it's very important. One of the things that we don't think this is a one and done. So Atlas 14 is going to keep being updated and stuff. So we wanted to make spots that we know what the storms are. And then like every 5-7 years, as more information comes in, as this stuff is updated, rerun these models. Do these scenarios change? So I think Hazen did a great job of standardizing this stuff so that we could use it in the future and keep being standardized at what we're looking at with this stuff.
So I'm not surprised to see there. Oh, Chuck, do you want to jump in?
Just a quick note. Yeah, thank you. Just the other kind of cool point to this storm discussion is the direction of and the speed of the storms too. So it wasn't just a static, Atlas 14 plus historical data kind of look at the system, but rather we looked at all that historical data that was available locally and said, what direction do these storms usually come from and go to, and how fast do they travel? And so it was a combination of all those data to come together with the most, I'd say, accurate as we could be, kind of amalgamation of what these types of storms would do in the city of Boston, given all those parameters: speed, direction, magnitude, etc.
That's very cool. I love that integrated approach and that you're really thinking about those different elements. I'm going to ask just one question from the chat. There's a number of questions coming in, but I think we can bring these forward to when we have our full Q&A session at the end. But I would love for you to talk about which stakeholders were involved in the selection of extreme weather and rainfall scenarios, and specifically this question of, were people more interested in what's becoming more common or the less common extreme weather event?
So it was kind of a fun thing to pick the storms. And I think Ben and Chuck, we really, really worked on this very hard to pick the storms. We were taking the mayor's requests as a guidance of what we picked. So we wanted major events, but what Chuck said was right. We also wanted them built in reality. What have we seen in the past and what could we expect in the future? Because we know they're going to get more intense. So there was a big discussion here about, okay, let's make a basis of storms, but then make them progressible. These are not just built as pie in the sky storms. This region has seen them, and we adjusted them also to adjust for climate change. Ben, Chuck, is that kind of a good general answer? Because it was a very interesting discussion.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer, Charlie. And, like you said, we didn't want to only look at the hurricanes, but also like a thunderstorm, for example, and how does that pair up with, when you have sea level rise?
What's very interesting is these heavy, intense peak storms can really do a lot of problems with the system. If you have a big, long, drawn-out storm, the system can move the water. But when it just hits it all at once, how can you get the water into the system quickly is another big problem.
Yeah, and I'm sure as many of the people who are here on the call already know, if you're in the New England area, you're already experiencing a 70% increase in your extreme precipitation. For those of us who are in the Midwest, I'm sitting outside of Detroit right now. We're really feeling the impact of that somewhere, I think 37% increase in historic precip. And I think that when we start thinking about these conditions, it really is, how do we accommodate those extreme events? But then also, right now, where I sit, I'm watching a thunderstorm roll across the Detroit area on the tail of an extreme event too. So sometimes we're balancing all of it, right? Like an extreme acute experience that then is followed by something that is lighter, but it is unrelenting, these impacts that we're feeling. I'm going to move us forward in our agenda for today's series, and I really appreciate the questions that are coming in. We'll have an opportunity for more Q&A. I think some of the questions that are coming up are going to be really relevant across our projects that we're going to look at, because they're talking about when information is shared, when people become more aware, then what are some of the repercussions of that? What does it mean for property owners? What does it mean for insurance? We want to bring information forward. We want to have transparency and open information and knowledge, but that can be it can be a scary thing for a number of reasons. And so I'm looking forward to talking with our panel about how do we ensure that communication, transparency, openness is also leading to action and equity and justice in the work that we're undertaking together. And so our next presenters are from KLA and the City of San Antonio. KLA's award-winning approach to bringing the planning process to life through its dashboard and other interactive tools have been on display with communities across America. Kim Lundgren, who's going to be speaking with us, is the Chief Executive Officer, and KLA is a woman-owned benefit corporation that delivers solutions to create sustainable communities by addressing climate change. Kim has more than 20 years of experience working with local governments to design, secure funding for, implement, and evaluate sustainability plans and programs focused on climate change adaptation and mitigation. And at KLA, she leads a team of climate and sustainability professionals that partner with local governments across the country to help them build the sustainable communities they envision. She's joined by Julia Murphy, who is the City of San Antonio's Deputy Chief Sustainability Officer and is on the team implementing the city's first climate action and adaptation plan, focusing on energy efficiency, modern transportation, and advancing the circular economy and promoting biodiversity and ecosystem services. She's currently helping to establish the Mayor's Youth Engagement Council on Climate Initiatives, a platform for area students to become civically involved in local climate policy considerations. She serves on the board of Texas Land Trust Council and is a member of the AICP, USDN, and ULI. I'll hand it over to you, Julia, I believe, to kick us off.
Thank you very much. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay. Let's see. Okay, it is shared. I am not seeing the speaker side-by-side view, so I can't really tell. But let me stop sharing and reshare again. Sorry about that.
Okay, let's do that. And if that doesn't work, then I can go ahead and bring your slides up and we could do it that way.
I could also bring them up if it's helpful.
I'm going to try one more time and then we'll go to plan B. Okay.
Here it comes. Perfect.
Oh, great. Great. Okay. Thank you so much. So I'll just dive right in. This is me, Julia Murphy. I'm the Deputy Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of San Antonio. And we passed our first climate action and adaptation plan at the end of 2019 and immediately had plans to go into implementation. And then we all know what happened in 2020. So one of the major elements in our climate plan is education and empowerment. It's a standalone set of strategies that were developed through our planning process as an integral part of the implementation of our climate plan. Because we know that this is not going to be the Office of Sustainability implementing this plan, it's going to be everyone in the community. And
Julia,
therefore,
I just want to let you know, you're not in presentation mode, which is okay because we can see your slides, but they're perfect.
okay.
There we go.
So sorry about that. And thank you for the guidance.
Perfect.
And there we go. So the plan, as any of you who have dealt with climate planning know very well, that it's a very, it's a lot of subject matter. It's very heavy subject matter, very scientific. There's a lot of data involved. And our plan in particular has 28 community mitigation strategies, 13 municipal mitigation strategies, 45 adaptation strategies. Overarching all of this is an emphasis on climate equity. And then we talk about throughout the plan the co-benefits, including air quality, ecosystem services, quality jobs, health outcomes, and affordability. So it's a lesson in and of itself, and it's a difficult read. We don't expect anyone to sit down and flip through and understand the plan from scratch. So we knew early on that we were going to have to find a way to communicate the plan to different audiences in a way that was easily digestible and understandable about this very fraught topic that tends to, polarize people, which I'm also sure you all have had experience with. So we developed our goals around climate education and empowerment. And really those were aligning around a shared vision of our climate action and adaptation plan, understanding the context of climate change and what it means for San Antonio, including what might happen if no action is taken. And unlike Boston, we're not a coastal community, so we don't directly face the impacts of flooding from the sea. However, as Charlie mentioned during Hurricane Harvey, San Antonio was one of the locations for climate migrants, which was a term that was cutting edge at the time. But we were actually inundated with many, many people from the Houston area who had to move to higher ground, literally. And so that was an impact on the city of San Antonio. We had to react and find a way to help our neighbors down the road. But the climate impacts that will be occurring in our city in South Texas are increased heat. It's already hot here. It's going to get hotter. Less rainfall overall, but when we do get storms, they will be intense. And then we will experience the flooding that occurs from those enhanced storm events. And so, making sure that people understand that and why it's important to take action and understand the changes that are coming is critically important to our future and our resiliency. So we also need people to be able to speak clearly and fluently about the climate plan and have, develop talking points for them, especially for key constituencies and the things that resonate with their needs and desires. And then finally, the education empowerment ultimately is to guide current and future policies, projects, programs, and budgets to maximize the efficiency and to accelerate outcomes, because we all know we're on a ticking time bomb right now. The picture on the right, I love. This is an initiative that we established last school year. It's our Mayor's Youth Engagement Council for Climate Initiatives, one of the elements of our overarching education and empowerment campaign. And so I took a stab actually for this presentation of kind of putting all of the elements that we are developing right now onto an org chart that kind of showcases the different things that we are trying to do to educate and empower residents of San Antonio. And just in a nutshell, I'll run through underneath the overall program, we are doing greater community engagement. And underneath that, we have both the climate information campaign that we are just now launching, and we have our sustainability dashboard website, which we're going to be going into more detail on in this presentation. But with the public information campaign, we're doing an attitudes and awareness study to find out where people are and what they understand about climate change. We are also doing grassroots community-based organization engagement through actually passing through many grants to these organizations that have boots on the ground and can speak to neighborhoods and communities that we may not be able to reach as effectively. Of course, we're using social media as a way to communicate, and we also have a particular electric vehicle public engagement campaign as well that's independent of all the other efforts. We also are training our own staff and elected officials. So if you go back up 2 layers in the middle there, we are making sure our executive team, the decision makers in the organization, understand and operationalize their departmental plans around climate. We are then mandating all city employees take mandatory training around climate. That we've met with some pushback on this effort, I'll say, because it's one more thing that people have to fit into their schedules, but we've made them very short and digestible. And hopefully this is going to be a model going forward for other cities. And certainly we'll be utilizing this when we bring new employees on board as well. And then we have specialized cross-departmental delivery teams that will be delivering on the policies, programs, and projects that implement the climate plan. And so, for example, electric vehicles, we definitely have to involve our transportation department, our building and equipment services department to build out that charging infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So this is not, again, we never wanted it to or intended it to be the Office of Sustainability trying to accomplish all this, or moreover, telling everyone what they had to do. We want them to embrace it and be empowered to operationalize it. And then we finally, we're attempting to engage the business community. That's a whole different way of communicating. And then on my org chart, if you go over a couple of squares to the left, we are being governed by 2 SA Climate Ready Advisory Committees. And they are also people from the community. They're subject matter experts and advocates, but they also need knowledge and education around climate. And so it's a big lift, and there's a lot that we have to do to kind of get people up to speed on the efforts that we're doing in San Antonio. Just really quickly, this is kind of, I don't expect you to read this, but it's just an illustration of how layered and how many different buckets our training and our education is playing out. And so on this slide, I've just demonstrated just in the municipal organization, those 3 areas where we're focusing with our executive team, our delivery teams, and our COSA staff. And you can kind of see, if you squint really well, kind of the subject matter that we're breaking into digestible pieces for them to kind of train up over the next months. But one of the major tools that we're utilizing, and again, in a minute, I'm going to turn it over to Kim Lundgren, is our SA Climate Ready Sustainability Dashboard. And I've put the website on the website address on this slide. But really what this is a visual storytelling tool, and it takes our written plan and all of its data and puts it into categorical tabs and tiles on a website where people can go to get the information they need readily. Also, it contains a lot of historical information, a lot of other documents that people can, it's a great research tool. But if I'm on the cross delivery team for electric vehicles and I just want to know what some of our goals are or what some of our trends are in the transportation sector, I can go right to that section of the sustainability dashboard and find the information we need. We are in the process of making this known. It's been established for a while, and staff continues to work with KLA to update the content, but kind of getting it into the public realm and even the municipal realm about this is a tool that can be utilized. We're still working on that. And when we get to the discussion part, I think we'll be talking about some of the lessons learned and challenges. But let Kim take it from here and show you about this wonderful product that we're really enjoying building out with their team.
Okay, thanks, Julia. And I will take over the screen share and take us all to the dashboard. And it is on my other screen, so I will have to turn just slightly. But Julia really did a great job of outlining, what San Antonio is trying to do. And it really is quite remarkable, the level of education and training that they're trying to incorporate both within the municipal government, but also to the community at large. And I think one of the things that's really important as we think about data visualization and climate change and all those pieces is we have different audiences that we're constantly having to engage with, right? And so we've got our folks that maybe are very technically savvy and understand all these details and maybe are pushing and driving our communities to do more. But then we have a whole group of people that really are not involved in our day-to-day. They're not paying as much attention unless there's maybe one reason to for a short period of time. And I think most everybody on this call probably is well aware that, it's 2021 now. We're seeing the impacts of climate change. When I wrote the first climate action plan that I wrote here in Massachusetts 20 years ago, we weren't really seeing the impacts like we are today. And so the urgency around getting every individual truly understanding enough about this and how it affects them and why they should care is a real essential priority for, I think, our industry. And, there's been so much more data and so many more of us are getting so much smarter on all this that sometimes we're forgetting that we're leaving a lot of people behind. And so we really try to work to bring all that really smart, detailed, technical stuff into more of a language and a look and feel that's going to resonate with folks who wouldn't know to even take a quick look, right? So they say that, we really these days have like seconds to catch someone's attention. And so you're not going to catch someone's attention in seconds with a table, with an Excel spreadsheet, or just with a bunch of data on a screen, right? It really takes a lot more than that. And it's funny, to give you folks a sense, when we talk about dashboard, a lot of folks, they want to just start seeing that data right out the gate. But this is a communications platform. And I think it's really important that folks understand that. We want this to feel welcoming. We want this to be something that community members are going to look at and feel comfortable that they can learn from it. And so we do. We start with these very large images and, that is San Antonio. That is definitely my community. I can see that. We try to keep the language at about a 6th grade level. That's essentially where the US population is on average as far as reading levels. And so it's also, if you think about the number of folks who English is not their first language, this is also important that we're keeping things very, very clear. And as Julia noted, certainly working with our youth. So we start with all that, and then we break it up. As she said, this is essentially the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan living online. And so what might be a chapter in your plan is a little tile here. What we try to do here on the tiles, again, images, very clear and specific, not too technical categories, naming so that these are things that folks might resonate with. And we also try to put in what I call like our little attention grabber storyline, right? So if we only have a couple seconds to grab someone's attention, they're going to see this image, then they're going to scroll down and they might find an attention grabber that is of interest to them. I think it's a super cool stat that San Antonio's #1 in Texas and #5 in the US for solar. How many of their residents know that, right? And so that is something that could grab their attention, say, you know what, I'd like to learn more about that. We don't need to put up all of the information right out the gate. We want to bring it into a long form storytelling type of a process. And that's exactly how this works. And so if you click on one of these tiles, we start by telling the story. So what are we talking about? What is SA Climate Ready? Why are we addressing climate change here in San Antonio? What are some of the key components of it? What is the greenhouse effect, right? Really getting down into some of the basics. Keep moving through greenhouse gases. how climate change impacts San Antonio. And then there's actually another tile that dives more deeply into that. But really looking through and understanding, in this case, we're using a lot more images. We start diving into the graphics when we get to the greenhouse gas emissions, for example. And all of these are interactive. So you can really get a sense of, oh, okay, where are our emissions coming from? What does that look like for us? Where are we trying to get to? So it all is in very much little kind of small nuggets, right? So that we're not overwhelming people, but it allows them to scroll. And a lot of folks say, oh, people don't like to scroll. That's actually not true. A lot of folks are going to be accessing websites on their mobile devices. You're at the bus stop, you're, waiting in line for something, you're on your mobile device, and scrolling is a lot easier to do there than clicking around. And so we continue to have these different types of graphs. We have other data visualizations that I'll show in a second, but just start telling that story. And the biggest piece here is that as you're going through, and you can put this at any place, but you've gone through and you told the story about what climate change means in San Antonio, what we're looking at, what are the areas we need to address. Anytime you are successful in getting a community member to get to your website, you always want to have a call to action for them. You've gone through the hard part. You got over that big barrier. Don't then waste it by not giving them something to do. Because even if you only inspired one person to make a change, that's one more person that you didn't have yesterday, right? And if you can do that every day, you start really making a difference. And so really trying to get folks to make those connections. And all these links can be, they all link externally to different programs that exist in the city. I'm going to take a quick look here at some of their climate equity. This is one of the newest tiles for the city. And, Julia kind of touched on this a bit, but this is a really important piece of information so that we are moving forward addressing climate change in San Antonio and frankly everywhere with that equity lens. This is really important. Wanting folks to understand what is climate equity, what do we mean by this? Talking about there's a very specific framework that the SA Climate Ready Plan utilized that helped prioritize resources and support to communities that are more burdened by climate change, but inevitably we're probably the least responsible for it, right? And so really looking at climate equity and how it really is exacerbating other inequities in the community, right? So balancing up here, this is income inequity, we have some health inequity. You could see specifically asthma rates, wages are significantly different. And you're talking about a community that's 75% made up of people of color. And yet the inequities are pretty significant there. And so it's really important that they're having these conversations, utilizing various mapping to show, okay, well, we know where there are areas that we can be focusing on. How do we make sure, knowing that heat is getting worse, how do we utilize some of this data and some of this mapping to help us address some of these urban heat island areas, and recognizing that some of these are some of our areas, of course, where we have more of our vulnerable community members. And so making sure that we're utilizing these tools, but it's also important that we present these tools to the public so that they understand that they exist and that the city is focusing in on trying to do more for them and engaging them in the process. And a lot of it starts by simply being able to give them a place where they can go. One of the things that I think, especially over the last 5 to 10 years, planning processes have really made, I would say, exponential improvements in how well we're at least trying to engage a much broader audience than we had in the past. The problem is most of our communities, and it doesn't matter how large you are, everybody has too many things to do, not enough people to do it, never enough money to do it. And so we have this amazingly equitable engagement process during a plan development, and then the plan is done, and the most important part of implementing comes up, and guess what? There's no more budget, there's no consultant team to support, and how do we get to keep talking to people? Well, the dashboard gets to be a good way to do that. And so the way the dashboard is set up is that ultimately your community members can check out your whole plan online through these various nuggets. In the tiles, they can also be tracking your progress. So there's very specific goals that may exist around renewable energy, for example, wanting to see how are we doing getting to our targets, so they can track performance metrics of the community. But also here on this action plan side, and San Antonio has some big has a lot of planning areas. So this is probably one of the bigger action implementation tables. But this is where you can also track the outputs. These were the actions you said you were going to move forward on. Where do we stand with this? Okay, some of these are in progress. Some of them are awaiting resources. What's it going to take to keep those moving forward? And so being able to give folks a general sense of both the outcomes and the outputs of your planning efforts and all of your climate work is, just gives them more resources to stay on top of things. We also add in things to keep the site fresh. Just typically, we can change the order of these tiles. We can change out these storylines. We also have news and events on this site. We do have some clients, I have a few up here that we also do blog posts for. We're going to actually be starting doing for San Antonio. Every time you add to the site, it's going to give you a better SEO. So things will pop up higher and folks can find it easier. But a lot of times what we're noticing is we provide a lot of communication support with this work. So if a client has a new report out, we send out some social media, we do a blog post. Instantly, you see the rates go up as far as how many folks are getting to the site. It's like any other website. You have to drive traffic to it. No website just creates its own activity. And I think it's really important we can embed some of those cool video maps. This is a coastal viewer from another client where we can just dive right in and embed these maps, and you can zoom in and see more specifics as far as like, okay, how does this affect us? So we can do a lot of embedding of mapping like this. But what we have found is that folks need that story first to understand, what am I even looking at? What are we talking about? Why should I care about this? If we can get that why should I care about this question taken care of, then the other pieces fall in line, and then they can start really diving into some of your higher tech tools. But first, we have to kind of engage them with some of the more fun, little interactive and descriptive types of visualizations and infographics. And so I know we're kind of coming up to time here, so I'll stop there and maybe can just answer some questions.
I really appreciate that, Kim and Julia. I mean, what an ambitious plan to have. And I will admit, actually, Brianna and I, in the course of this, just were texting back and forth and saying, we had a web design meeting this morning. And we were saying, I think we're probably going to need to talk to Kim about some of the ideas that we've had. Because those same questions, you want people to, care about their place, and for us, and that place is ASAP. But that story is, how do we offer something? Bring it to them, meet people in it, meet them where they are. And I see questions that are coming up in the chat about this and the way that we're going to keep conversations going from the early phase. I'm an urban planner by training. I was trained in that. Engagement happens early, but we know engagement has to happen throughout the course of a project. And so I'm going to ask us to hold for our discussion until we get to our panel Q&A, because I want to introduce our discussant here, who I think is going to help to tee up some of these ideas and maybe bring to life some of the questions around sustained engagement and what it means for those of us who are in professional practice, but really bringing work home to our communities so that they understand that their values are being recognized, that we're communicating those, and then we're putting these tools of varying technical representation into their hands. And so our discussant joining us now is Carla Evanbach. She is an elected leader of the 4,000 member Sustainable Communities Division of the American Planning Association, and also a member of the of ASAP. Additionally, she's the principal of Evanbach Consulting, and in her work and volunteerism, she brings leadership to collaborative problem solving, advocates effectively for sustainability and smart growth as community goals, and offers expertise on an array of urban planning topics. She has maintained AICP certification for over 20 years and holds a master's degree in urban planning from Harvard University Graduate School of Design. Carla, thank you so much for joining this conversation for the webinar today. And maybe we could just jump right in with this question of, how can planning and adaptation work together to integrate climate information into award-winning community design and engagement projects? I mean, these examples we've seen here this afternoon, I think are beautiful examples of that idea, and what more can we be doing as professionals out there in the field to replicate this kind of work?
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm glad to be here with ASAP as a co-host, representing Sustainable Communities Division. Just want to get that out there. And also a quick congratulations to Hazen and Sawyer and the City of Boston and KLA and San Antonio for your achievements in visualizing change. Glad to be here with you on this stage. Well, I think that we have already touched on many of the important pieces in some of the presentations, but clearly some of the key factors are breaking down the silos that prevent sort of movement towards tools like these, the movement towards engagement like this, these sort of processes that elicit open dialogue. Obviously, having our community partners part of the conversation from the very beginning is key, to be part of the visioning, to be part of the learning about what is affecting our communities, and then part of the leadership for the solutions. I will make a plug here to say that organizations like ASAP and the Sustainable Communities Division within APA, they play an important role in elevating this value, this particular value of engagement and participation through their many areas of work, policy work, to providing resources, hands-on resources and tools to planners and other professionals. There is that opportunity through them to have a visible model and resource. As I was listening to, I just wanted to add that, you know, it kind of has to be built in as a value from the beginning. So I think many of us and all of us are moving towards not just seeing, you know, public input as, you know, one box to check, but it's a source of essential information, and it's a source of essential direction that allows us to get to those final measures that actually make a difference. Because if we're all working on it together and we're agreeing as much as possible on the choices that we're making, then we are much more likely to get there.
Yeah, I'm interested, Carla,
Yeah.
in your observation. Something that I'm observing a lot in the climate adaptation and resilience community is a discussion around how we fund this work differently. And often that comes with a conversation about kind of innovative finance solutions, which might include community financing and impact investing. And to me, that becomes a really clear reason why we need to keep engagement strong between the community from not just the planning phase, but like all the way through to the implementation phase. And I kind of wonder, from where you sit in your perspective with APA, Sustainable Communities Division, if that conversation of like extending the engagement life is also tied to the way in which we're anticipating projects become funded and kind of move to implementation. And if like there's a connection that's being drawn about how engagement stays central to our work throughout the process.
Yeah, well, I think in that it's more and more of a value to incorporate authentic engagement. You know, that is probably more and more tied to the sources of funding that you may achieve. So we're incentivized, at least by funding alone, to aspire to those values, because I think a lot of our funders are also aspiring towards those values. And obviously, I think a holistic approach about what the process is from beginning to finish, and communicating that out to all of the people engaged in our work as our partners helps create an understanding of how we may act as a team to get from the beginning stages to the end result, and think through, plan ahead where we're going to acquire this funding and move this forward through time.
So a question that I think we had talked about in advance of this is how do adaptation professionals, urban planners build their personal communication skills? And when is it time to reach out to experts to bring them into your project team to ensure that you're reaching your community?
Well, I think it's probably well known to anybody who's had to make any Zoom presentations during the past year that this is always an exercise in practice, practice, practice. I mean, we are always in the process of improving ourselves in that regard. I was a very introverted child, and now I'm talking on Zoom. So I think that to the extent that we all can work on understanding the importance of how we convey ourselves to our audience and understanding our audience and gearing ourselves to our audience, that should be something that we all work on. And we can do that through various forms of training. But in particular, I'm thinking of urban planners here. If we know that we need to be better at this, we need to be better at mediating situations, engaging in diplomatic behavior in situations where people don't necessarily agree, then it kind of behooves us to throw ourselves into situations where we can practice that. So even if it's not in our everyday professional life, to engage oneself in volunteer work, where you find yourself needing to mediate these things and learn and develop your skills in mediation, in diplomacy, that's all the better. I mean, I've engaged myself in various kinds of volunteer work over the years, not necessarily just planning related, that has helped with all that. That said, these are very important and delicate issues that can't be just handled in a cavalier manner. And there is a whole, subspecialty essentially developing in the planning, resilience, sustainability community around communication. And when there's a matter of scale, when there's quite a lot at stake, when it's important to remove the political heat, it makes a lot of sense to make that investment in a communications entity who can bring expertise and finesse that, you're not just flying by the seat of your pants. You've got somebody who's done this before. They've really vetted their processes and have a very fine understanding of messaging that they bring to the process. In that case, it does make sense to get that professional help and that expertise. And as I say, there's these days, a whole industry essentially that is developing subspecialty within planning to communicate and understand all those very fine dynamics.
Mm-hmm. So I want to invite Ben and Charlie to turn your videos back on and join us, because I think that we're getting to a space that I'd love for us to start in an open Q&A. And that's about how do we engage communities that may be difficult to reach on a digital platform. And I'm also seeing a question and a conversation in the chat around the Climate Ready Advisory Committees. Were those committees able to reach out to more vulnerable communities or at-risk communities? How has that been possible? And, I am very possibly conflating this, that there may be communities that are at risk or more vulnerable that are less likely to be on the digital space where these tools have been located. But if we could talk about that, how do we engage everyone fully, get these things out there and information accessible, and then perhaps speak a bit more in depth about that, those at-risk communities?
I'll start real quick because I think what you started on was really good in Boston. This is before COVID. This is we had Climate Ready Boston, and they were picking by neighborhoods, and they were doing studies of those areas of what could be happening and stuff. And Climate Ready Boston did a great job of having neighborhood meetings after hours, bringing people in, promoting people to come, and presenting it to them at their neighborhood locations and stuff. And I think it does take a lot of that and they have the maps there and they talk about them and have people ask questions and stuff. Because you're right. A lot of people, they don't have these, the computers and all this stuff like that. But you have to promote neighborhood groups going out there and talking to people. And Carla had it right. You have to take practice, and just go out there. I think one of the big things people have to understand is whoever's doing this, they have information that people want. Don't be afraid to give it to them. They're not going to kill you. They want the information. Give it to them.
I would just add that it is common, actually. I mean, most, even going from lowest income folks, you do often find that they have smartphones. That is pretty common. That typically there is some kind of basic level of a cell phone, a mobile device that they can get online. Also, libraries have become really popular for folks to access information online. So I wouldn't say it, I still agree that it's important to have those hard copies of information and reaching all the audiences. But it is to a lesser and lesser degree. I mean, even my 96-year-old grandmother's on Facebook, which is quite hysterical in its own right. But I would add too, like a lot of this whole conversation on communications, of course, is like right up my alley, because I do think it's so important that we're getting this right. And a lot of times where we have to look for that guidance is not in the places that planners or scientists tend to look. We should go to marketing campaigns. There's a reason that, a lot of these consumer brands do so well. They have totally figured out how to target their audiences and get to the right messages. There's a lot that we can pull from what they're doing. And it really is such an important exercise. I totally agree. It's practice. But first thing you should be asking yourself every time you're giving a presentation, who is my audience? Who am I talking to? And what do they care about? Having done this work all over the country, especially in the early 2000s, coming from New England and then traveling down to Texas or Florida, Alabama, other places, I can tell you, when I traveled to Texas in 2005, we did not talk about climate change. We talked about air quality. We talked about public health. We talked about the things that they cared about. And it's really important that folks are taking the time to understand what your audience cares about. And fortunately, from a communication standpoint, unfortunately, from our reality, climate change is going to pretty much affect almost everything that somebody cares about. So it's unfortunate, but from a communication standpoint, it actually allows you to connect with people on a level you can get everything accomplished that you need to. And if it's not the right kind of room to talk specifically about the details in climate change, you don't have to, because what you really want to get to is the solutions. And you can focus in on those by looking at some of the other areas that contribute to it. So I think there's a lot of those pieces. And in one way that, the dashboard is now allowing for that transferability is what I call the print button. It's essentially, allows communities to create an annual report. And so you just pick and choose which graphs, which images, whatever pieces you want to bring over. And then that can be, and it comes out professionally designed piece. And so again, really making sure that if you are doing in-person hard copy print work, that it's very graphically heavy, minimize the words. Because for a lot of these, especially if we're talking to a non-traditional audience where we're trying to build their capacity and their interest, you can't give it all to them right at once. Give them enough to make them interested to learn more. And then you can send them to another website or another place, but it's capturing their attention and their interest, keep them willing to be part of the discussions to begin with.
Thanks, Kim. So I want to pepper Charlie and Ben with a couple of, I think, quick questions that had come in when we were in our transition. What tool did you use to impose the flood visualizations on Street View? Maybe it's not quick. Maybe it's...
Yeah, it's a great question. It's kind of a combination of different things. So, the first is, having a 360 camera that can actually take the images. And it's processed through a couple of desktop, not quite Photoshop, but a similar program to impose and render the model predicted flooding. And then ultimately it's hosted through a platform called Hollow Builder, which we're looking to, expand beyond that capability. Mm-hmm. Kind of the overview right now.
And then when, again, for Charlie and Ben, when, this product as you modeled it, I think to me looks amazing. There's a question of how did you do user testing with non-technical folks, and who do you expect to be really engaging and touching this tool, and how did you find out how they responded to it?
We did not do testing. I think we were kind of our own test subjects. Ben, we let Ben kind of cut loose with a lot of stuff as we asked them to go do some stuff, and they would come back and what does this look like? What does this look like? And we test it. And Hazen did a great job of hearing what we said and constantly coming back with something new until we got to something that we thought would be very, very useful.
Mm-hmm.
I think Ben said it right to us. We had the idea of Google. People are used to that, doing the thing of street views and stuff. Something like that is what we gave them the thing. We want something like that. Go get it.
Mm-hmm. So I think that in both of these cases, in the conversation today, and then also in conversations that we've had leading up to our session today, an important element of the success of the work was the trust that existed between the city of San Antonio and KLA, and between BWSC and Hazen and Sawyer. And I would just really appreciate hearing from Julia and then from Charlie about the kind of value of trust that is built with a partner, and that you can give them something as intimate as your plan is, then say, tell this story to the world, and the importance that partners play in your work.
So I'll start. Thank you for that question. First, just at a basic level, the importance of partners in our work is that we are a small staff. We've got giant expectations on our shoulders, and we need partners to help us. So I think I gave the illustration that we have a city website. It's got the plan on it. It's got all the stuff that we've worked on and policies and all kinds of things, but it's not a good communication tool. And we knew that this information is critically important to, as Kim said, meet people where they are, and allow them to get the information they need quick and fast, and not be bogged down that it's the government telling them what to do. We kind of are with the dashboard. We have a bit of separation from our government website. So fortunately, we're partnering with Kim Lundgren and Associates, who are sustainability and climate experts. So a lot of we weren't just choosing a communications expert. We were choosing someone with subject matter expertise who could help us help ourselves. And Kim was involved, and her group were involved with the predecessor to our climate plan, which was our sustainability plan. So she has built an intimate knowledge base up about the work that we're doing in San Antonio City of Sustainability. Where we have had some challenges, I would say, is this is not part of anyone's job description on city staff. And so we then have to kind of encourage our staffers to, ride along with this ride and make sure that it's a tool that is constantly updated and fresh. And then secondly, we are contracting with a private company, so that costs money. So we have had to go back a couple of times to the drawing board and figure out how to keep this contract alive. It's quite frankly, it's not a lot of money. I'm sure Kim wishes it were more, but nevertheless, it is a budgeted city initiative. And so fortunately, we were able to ascertain that this is a sole source project because it is so unique in the way that we are able to communicate through this tool.
One of the things I'll build on that is, so one of the things is, as I said, the commission's its own separate entity. We are funded by the ratepayers of Boston. And when you talked about the consultants, we go through a pretty rigorous selection process. And we've been working with Hazen for a long time on a lot of different projects. And what you asked is, is how do you build the trust? It's time. You have other projects, you work with them, you get the trust, you build the thing that they're not going to sit there and just bill you just for billable hours. They're going to sit there and do the project. And we've gotten that trust with Hazen. And but it takes time to do it. And then when you get that trust, we could sit there and go with Ben and say, and Chuck, and say, here, go play with this thing, show us what you can do. But the other thing I will say with the commission is we do not just turn a project over to a consultant and say, come back to us later when you got something. It's very interactive. We went back and forth on this quite a bit, and we had several meetings. What have you got? And the more we saw Ben playing with his toy, the more fun it was watched too. I mean, he had a lot of fun with this, and we let him go.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, thank you both for that. Carla, I just wonder, from the perspective that you bring, both as a private consultant in your own right and from the APA Sustainable Communities Division, what insights would you offer us as the last word on the panel in the way that we build partnerships between public and private entities for more sustainable and climate resilient communities?
Well, I think that the model that we ascribe to at Sustainable Communities Division includes emphasis on 4 things: people, partnerships, and education and leadership. Those are our 4 priority areas. And that's certainly, those are good areas for all of us to consider. And what I think that we can achieve through breaking down certain barriers that have existed between different sectors, different branches of government, and by creating tools that are, in a sense, democratic in nature, like the ones we've seen today, creates a certain openness that allows for actions that we haven't even planned for yet or decided, because we're letting these tools guide us based on the input that we get. So I think this openness is something that I encourage, and this reliance on partnerships. And then the other thing that came up today that I thought was pretty cool is sort of the idea of a durable tool, one that keeps working over time. And even after the consultants have been paid and gone home, the tool is still there and serving its purpose in new ways. And we can all work on finding ways to make that happen if we share technology, we share ideas, we share case studies. And that's something that you can find through some of these professional organizations, something that ASAP does very well as the Sustainable Communities Division. So those are my 2 cents.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to take us out on a few wrap-up slides. I just want to say thank you to our experts today, to Charlie, Benjamin, Chuck, Kim, Julia, and Carla for being here. If you would like to get more involved with ASAP and with the co-creation series, you can learn more about the series by emailing me directly. If you'd like to share a project, you're welcome to do that by submitting a project through our forms. And you can always support ASAP, this program and other ASAP programs, by donating to ASAP on our website. We will have our next co-creation series coming up in August. It's going to be focusing on building resilience, design solutions for buildings and communities. And in October, we're going to be discussing designing the utilities of the future, looking at both water and electric utilities and adaptation solutions being implemented across the country. And then I'll remind you again, in the midst of that, from October 14th to 28th, we'll be hosting the Climate Service Providers Academy. You can learn more about the Service Providers Academy on the ASAP website. It's an opportunity to get hands-on with publicly available data and to learn about the principles of practice from ASAP. Finally, if you haven't already, I encourage you to join us. When you become a member of ASAP, you get access to our resources and our network of professionals. Individual membership begins at $150, and we customize our sponsorships and organizational packages that fit the needs, the strengths, and the budget of any organization. So do reach out to me or to another staff member at ASAP to learn more about how you can get involved. And I just want to thank you all so much for being with us today. Thank you again to our speakers. Thank you, Brianna, for running our tech. And feel free to reach out anytime for more information.